Uh, we are a little bit delayed for about 10 minutes or so, and we are expecting more people to come in. In fact, we had about 60 people register for this program, and so far we have only a few just come in. We are expecting more. My name is Naga Kipgen. I'm the Executive Director for Center for Southeast Asian Studies, and I would like to welcome everyone. And before we go on to proceed the program as it is written here, I would like to invite my research assistant, Sanjana Dahar, to say formally a welcome words, and then we'll proceed to the next program.
A very good afternoon, everyone. I, on behalf of the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, would like to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished guests, faculty members, participants, and audience. The theme for today's discussion is contested identity and competing claims along India-Myanmar border region. We have here with us a panel of seasoned experts, and it is my pleasure to introduce them. Our first speaker, Dr. Bhagat Oinam, is Professor of Philosophy, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is also a chairperson of the newly established Center for the Study of Northeast India at the university. He had earlier worked at CSDS, NEHU, and IIT Bombay. His areas of interest include existentialism in phenomenology, moral and social philosophy, and indigenous philosophy. Our second speaker, Dr. M. Amarjeet Singh, is professor at the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research, Jamia Millia Islamia University. He teaches courses on social conflict and society and politics of India's Northeast. His research interest focuses on conflict studies, identity politics, and migration studies. Our third speaker, Dr. Thongkolal Haokep, is an assistant professor at the Center for the Study of Law and Governance, Jawaharlal Nehru University. His areas of interest include governance, ethnicity and ethnic relations, borderland studies, India's Look-East policy, and Northeast India studies. He has previously taught at the Department of Political Science, Presidency University. And lastly, our fourth speaker, Mr. K. Kokho, is an assistant professor at the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research, Jamia Millia Islamia University. He teaches political sociology, and his areas of interest include ethnicity, identity, and conflict. The panel discussion will be chaired by Dr. Nagenpao Kipgen, Executive Director of Center for Southeast Asian Studies. He is also an Associate Professor at the Jindal School of International Affairs. I would like to especially thank our guests for sparing their valuable time despite the busy schedule to be a part of this event and make it a grand success. I would also like to express my gratitude to the Center for giving me this opportunity to address the House. I would now like to open the floor to the Chair for the commencement of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjana. So before we proceed on to the next program, I would like to invite Vansika to bring some of the gifts that we have for our speakers today. And I would like to invite first Professor Oinam to stand up and receive a token of gift from our center. Then and next, Dr. Amarjeet Singh. And next, Dr. Thongkolal Haokep. And last but not the least, Mr. Kokho. All right, thank you very much. So we are expecting a number of guests coming on the way, including one Indian former ambassador to Myanmar, Gautam Mukhopadhyay is on his way. And I would like to acknowledge friends here, especially our friend A.K. Misra, Dr. A.K. Misra. He was the former Vice Chancellor of ICFA University in Mizoram. Thanks for coming. He has been a strong and active supporter of our center's activities. He was there last semester when we organized a conference, similar discussion, and we hope to extend that cooperation and relationship in the years to come as well. And thank you very much. And also I'd like to say thank you to my friends and my students as well for attending this panel discussion. And I know there are several programs going on today, but this shows that you are either interested in the area or you would like to see the speakers face to face, because we are anyway streaming live the entire event. As we speak, we stream live, and you can watch these things at the end of the program at your home. So before I begin to invite the speakers, I would like to make some clarifications. So the topic itself, if you look at contested identity and competing claims along India-Myanmar border region, by itself is already complicated. And I have studied a lot about this Indo-Myanmar region. And today, the main reason why I bring these scholars together is to have a conversation, academic conversation. Because I know that in its community, this issue has been talked about, discussed at length at different levels. And as far as my knowledge is concerned, we have never had any academic platform where we bring together scholars from this community talking about their own issues. But I also like to warn you that we are not trying to ask the speakers to represent their own community. By no means, nobody is representing the entire community. We just would like to hear from them as scholars. What do they say based on the topic that they have been assigned? And also, I would like to ask the students or the audience to be very careful when you ask questions. So this topic has been very complicated, very sensitive, and very controversial at times. But since it's academic conversation, I hope we all understand and then we all have a very mature discussion. So having said that, I would first like to invite our first speaker, Dr. Bhagat Oinam, and he'll be talking about contested identity along India-Myanmar border region. Before I invite him, let me tell you one thing. I was born in Myanmar, and I spent quite an amount of time in Manipur, Northeast India, of course in Delhi. Then eventually I moved to America. Then I came back to India for different reasons. One reason being my wife is Indian, and of course the second reason being I'm teaching at Gender University. And what I see is that some people do have a very little understanding about this community, specifically the Kukis, the Nagas, and the Meiteis. For example, if you go to Myanmar, in the context of Myanmar or Burma, Meitei is one of the tribes of Chin in the context of Myanmar. And similarly, Nagas are also under Chin nomenclature in Myanmar. Of course, there is a movement, or let's say there's a protest saying that we are not part of the Chin community. That's an ongoing debate going on. But officially, Nagas, Meiteis, Kukis, they all are under the Chin nomenclature in Myanmar. But if you cross the border and come to the Indian side of the border, they all claim to be different ethnicities or different ethnic groups. And of course, you might have read articles and watched some movie clips and others where there has been conflict between these communities at various points of times in the history. So having said that, I want everyone to keep that in mind, and I would like to invite the first speaker not to dwell on any specific community as such, but give us a detailed, or let's say a general understanding about identity along India-Myanmar border region. What do people see the other side of the border versus what do people say in the other side of the border, in the Indian side and the Myanmar side? And what are the implications? And how can we move forward? So on the general perception or the general understanding of this ethnicity and identity along India-Myanmar border region. And I would like to thank my colleague, Professor Samrat. He is leading a center for, I think, border studies, and he has some students along with him. They go and visit border areas, Bhutan, Bangladesh, I think Myanmar also, and they are here with us because it relates to communities from across the border. And so now I would like to invite first speaker, Professor Oinam, to talk about contested identity along India-Myanmar border region. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kipchen. I think I'm audible to you, right? Thank you very much for inviting me. But I must also tell you that I'm not a very seasoned and grass-rooted experts as these my colleagues are. You must have seen how they had been engaging with. And my discipline, you have already heard, is from philosophy. So my love for the region or my work is largely out of my, not the professional, but of emotional concern that I always had with the region. And which Kipchen has said is very contested and very dicey and problematic area. And when you said this, it was in 2002, it reminds me suddenly, I had forgotten about it. My article came up as a full-fledged link in Economic and Political Weekly, EPW, on the issues of ethnicity and identity. And there were lots of, I was happy that lots of critique, lots of comments on that article from the communities across the region. And one of the organizations, armed group, was extremely unhappy. And I did exchange few conversation, and I was in the academic mode. You know, in the academic seminars, you can speak out even sometimes very assertively. And the last letter I got was that we know where you are residing, how you move to Nehu up and down, and bullets knows no friends and foes. So that was the end of the conversation, because when violence is coming on the way, then there is no more conversation possible. Either you fight it out or you back out. So perhaps that was one of the reasons for my trying to move out, and I got into IIT Mumbai. So that's my long journey coming back to Delhi from where I started my career. I'll put it like this, that the story about this region, which you can call border or frontier of what you call at one time the British and another the Burmese, the kingdom, the empire. And when they narrate their own story about the geography, about their history, about their political domain, certainly the mapping out of the space is their own. Whether you really reside into it or not, that's a different issue altogether. But political power of control that you assert, that I have a control up to this region or that region, is one kind of a narrative from which the whole this crisis of the present is. I'm not going into the details, as Kipchen has said. I mean, you are going to hear from them, and in internet there are full of informations. But the perspective is what I would like to submit before you, is that 1826, that first Anglo-Burmese war, and subsequently leading to Treaty of Yandabu, was a clear-cut starting point of demarcation of the boundaries, that this is up to this region the British India was going to have, and beyond that is of what you call the Burmese. And prior to that, there had been lots of raids and infighting. British was not very keen to enter into this region. Its control was in Kolkata. So naturally, this is a remote region. They are not very keen to venture out. But slowly, because of the globalization processes at that point in time, the trade communication that was happening between Indochina and this Indo-India, and through the Myanmar, So the trade route was an essential need for the British. And in this time, since you have also called many of us, most of us from Manipur, the kingdom of Manipur was under the control of the Burmese. So for 7 years, it was devastated. The king, the princes, they reigned to what you call the Sylhet and other areas of Kasar and all this. So, and many went up to Sibsagar. So it was completely devastated under the control of the Burmese. So king of Manipur that was a Gambhir Singh, was very keen to get his kingdom back. And all his own he could not. So you needed a colonial power, the British, to recover his kingdom. And British, for its own trade interest, wanted to use this king, the prince, who has lost his kingdom. So all the way these trade routes, Gambhir Singh was instrumental in building because he wanted his kingdom back. For that he has to do. Even Tirot Singh of Meghalaya, who was captured and hanged, killed by the British, who was resisting to this trade route construction, all goes to Gambhir Singh because he was seen as a mercenary by many, but he was someone who was trying to recover his kingdom. You can see give and take that took place. And when this war took place in 1826, with British winning the war and the Treaty of Yandabu being, signed, nowhere this king of Manipur comes to the picture. It was clearly between the Burmese and the British. All said and done, that is the mightier the empires, they signed treaties. Rest were, negotiated. So kingdom was given back to this king of Manipur, but a large chunk of Manipur, which is called Kabo Valley, went to Myanmar, Burma, with the agreement that every year the Burmese government will pay money of compensation or what you call rent to the king of Manipur. And this continued till 1947-49. And only in the 1949, when Manipur was merged to India, then Prime Minister Nehru, without much thought, gave away the entire valley to Myanmar. So this is one narrative of the what you call colonial powers and empires that went on. The subsequent narrative that you will find today is that those small communities, what you call Kuki groups, staying in this what you call frontier region, were never present in the grand narrative of the British or of the Burmese. Or not that these communities did not exist, but their existence were summarily ignored. So when you draw your border of the British Empire or the Burmese Empire, the ethnic communities who were residing there for centuries, of course they were moving to and fro from here, and this colonial boundary was not in their frame of reference, because they have villages, one village with another villages, then there are village chiefs, there are contacts, communication amongst themselves, and which the colonial power also did not intervene. The war takes place in the greater framework, and the boundaries are being made, and these were what you call non-existent in their narrative. But with the nation state of India coming, British living, and the Indian state, the Burmese, the creation of the Pakistan, East and West, Pakistan, the entire whole discourse of people and the land, citizenship and the state comes into the forefront, which was not in existence. So many of these communities, because of their own education and being able to assert their point of view, which they call right to self-determination, they start saying this is what we had been living, and we were never in the picture of this narrative. You draw a boundary across our villages, our land, without our knowledge, how can you do? So this is another discourse. You will find what Kipchen was saying, that some Kuki village, their parents are in that side, the wife is in this side, and people keep moving. Still now there are free movement in many places, though there had been attempt and even talk about fencing of the border. And there are lots of issues taking place about Myanmar government infringing into the Indian territory. But this is a political issues which I do not want to enter into. But all that I'm submitting here is that the narratives come from different perspectives. One is the colonial and empire-based narratives. Another is from the, what you call, I won't call it subaltern, but ethnicity, the smaller communities who were never existent in the discourse of empire and the nation, slowly gets their own recognition, because it is no more we are subject of the British, but it is in India, and each one of us are equal citizen of this country. And this is the strength of how, the nation state called India is recognizing to its citizens, whether you are in UP or Bihar or Manipur or anywhere, you are a part of this country and the equal rights you have as a citizen. And that is where the whole negotiation begins. So the assertion of ethnicity in the light of language that comes in, borders settlement that comes in, and Manipur is a clear example where there are as many as 32 communities with different small languages. I don't want to break into dialects and language. That is also another colonial narrative. I don't want to. But let us say, linking languages, 32 of them. So you can imagine that each one of them are wanting to have their own autonomy. But if you start giving 32 different statehood, that also becomes a, I will fall short of saying a joke, but it is even sometimes redundant. So you have to negotiate between your rightful claim of your identity, self-governance on the one side, but also see that India has a larger picture where, you cannot keep on breaking states with smaller sizes, which is not good convenient for governance itself. So we have to negotiate on this Indian side. This is one. But contemporary issues, which I will end up with this, is you must have also noticed about National Register of Citizenship, NRC, which the present Home Minister is pushing ahead with Assam because of the foreigners coming from Bangladesh. It has been a major issue. But Mr. Kipgen may react now. The point is, many of these Kuki communities from the Myanmar side also keeps coming. And obviously this is the reason that whenever there is a greener pasture, you want to move there. Why do people come from the northeast? We want a better education, we come to Delhi, Chandigarh, nearby places. You do well, compete with other communities, citizens of this country, then you also get a set position. Each one of us are being, given a post in other parts of the country. That is also a strength of India. Nobody tells you that you come from northeast, you go back. If you are good enough, you can compete enough, you can be absorbed as a faculty or any officials in any part of the government machineries. So this is one issue on this side, that you have the recognition, all these people coming in. Now this infiltration is another. Now the argument from the community's point of view is that your boundary is construct of the colonial narrative. For us, we have been living across. We don't know about what is Myanmar or India. This is our land, this is our village. This is a narrative. Now, how do you negotiate between this? Because nation state of India and of Burma is also a reality. So one has to, I think, recognize, and there is no clear-cut answer into this. The problem is there are multiple narratives, at least two contesting narrative is coming, and identity crisis and so on and so forth are result of this, that in one side you have the Indians, the nation states coming in, citizenship, governance, facilities and so on, that resources to be shared. These are the issues on the one side. Then movement of people in their grassroots level, which knows no boundary of the nation state, is another, where you have to negotiate. I'll put a full stop here and then maybe we can discuss further on this.
Thank you, Professor Ainam. I just would like to welcome the a little bit latecomers, including Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, because he was there in Myanmar for 4 years, 3 years. And of course, his wife is from Manipur, and she was also former Indian ambassador to different countries, including Indonesia. Thank you for joining us. Now, I would like to, before I call on the second speaker, please, I would like to clarify a few things here. The speakers don't pick the topic, I assign them. So please, you have to know about that. I assign the speakers its topic. So some of them do not really appreciate the topic that I have assigned them. But I said, you can say whatever you want, but I would like to put on record this the topic, so that because this will be released in the media and people will look at it. So, but in between, you can discuss or talk about whatever you want. Again, let me just remind everyone again that this is, I would like to end up as academic conversation rather than emotional talk or speech. So having said that, now let me invite our second speaker, Professor Amarjit Singh. He will be talking about the Meitei Labansaram and insurgency movement. And I want him to stick to 15 to 20 minutes. Yes. And definitely I will give you another chance during the Q&A session. Thank you.
I'll do that. Thank you very much, Dr. And also to the Jindal University for inviting me. So I have been assigned a topic, as Doctor has already said. And now Professor Bhagat has also already given a background of this borderland. Last week I was at the India-Pakistan border. I went to Naga and some other places. So now these border areas, there is a big difference between this side of the border and then the other side of the India-Myanmar border. It's a very, very different, in terms of the topography, in terms of the various socio-economic developmental indicators. So this is something, and then now coming to the India-Myanmar border. So now if you look at the Indian side, Indian side is relatively, in terms of various developmental indicators, the Indian side is, relatively better than the other side, means in the northern and the western part of Myanmar. So this is something that that we need to ignore. So now, as Professor Bhagat has already set the tone, so now let me just, and at the same time, in this borderland, say in the Indian side of the border, in the Myanmar side of the border, there are very similarity of problems. There are, problem of, underdevelopment. There are, various, socio-economic problems, in this side of the border and the other side of the border. And say, as for example, in India also, especially in several of the northeastern part of the country, so many of us are familiar with what is popularly called the insurgency movement. Likewise, if you cross the other side of the border, there is also, similar kind of movement. Now, even the Myanmar government is also trying to resolve this problem through negotiation. So like as India government is also negotiating with several groups in the northeast, now the Myanmar government has also initiated the process of bringing these various ethnic groups of Myanmar into the so-called the official peace process. So this is something, this is something which is very, very similar in the case of, but at the same time, this particular region, as I see, is that now things are moving. If you look at in various developmental indicators, things are moving, of course, slowly, but in a, positive directions in terms of, say, one of the main problem is the connectivity. Yes, the problem is there, but still there are, a lot of progress has been made, especially with the initiative under the Act East policy of the government of India. So, but there are challenges, the challenges are, There are numerous challenges, but at the same time, there is also a lots of hope and lots of expectations from this, the border region. But why I am bringing is that there is always a negative perception about this particular region. But at the same time, now things are moving, especially in Myanmar also, the things are in terms of various, if you look at various government reports, you'll find that in terms of various developmental indicator or in infrastructure development, things are moving very positively. So likewise, so therefore, what is going to happen in this borderland is that along with this Act East policy, and till now, there is a very limited cross-border, very limited cross-border economic activities. So now, what is happening is that as things are, changed, many positive things are taking place on the other side of the border. So we also expect a lot, in the near future. Now, I will now just try to since being led down the broader framework, now let me come to the Indian side of the border and to Manipur. So now the organizer has given me a very important, I think this is very appropriate because why Manipur? Manipur is a very, very important state, no doubt. But at the same time, this is also a state which has seen large number of, various, ethnic identity movement. And this is still going on. And then now even the government of India, this government has also realized that if the Manipur problem, some of this problem can be solved, then that will have very, very big implication for the rest of the Northeast. So now this is about this identity movement, especially when we talk about the identity movement, especially in places like Manipur or in the Northeast. So now this identity movement always transform into some kind of, some kind of movement, which is actually, if I have to say that, many of these identity movements are actually the movement for separate states. Say, for example, some of this movement, you see, especially in places like Manipur, there are movement for, they call it the independence movement. Okay, but if you look at, especially in many of the northeastern states, there are various movements. But if you actually look at many of these statehood movement, many of these movements are actually the statehood movement. So now, if you go back to the 1954 State Reorganization Report, which was produced by the State Reorganization Commission, one of their recommendations in 1954 was that there should be only one state in the Northeast. That was, what they suggested was the state of Assam. There should be only one state in the Northeast. So they said that the Assam, which is a border state, should be strong in terms of economy and in terms of militarily. So the State Reorganization Commission recommended that there should be a state of Assam and the two union territories of Manipur and Tripura. So this was the recommendation of the State Reorganization Commission in 1954, and this was accepted by the Parliament of India when the State Reorganization Act was passed. So therefore, Assam became a state, and Manipur and Tripura became union territories. But in due course of time, many new states have been, created out of Assam, say Nagaland, Mizoram, and Meghalaya, and like that. And at the same time, the union territory of Manipur and Tripura have also become separate states. So now, coming to Manipur, if I have to begin with, Manipur is a very, very, I must say that it's a very, very difficult state, in the sense that, there are several ethnic groups in the state of Manipur today. But what I see is that now many of these, the major ethnic groups, there is a sense of insecurity. Say, for example, the Manipuri, the Meitei people, they are the most dominant, politically dominant group. But there is a sense of insecurity among the Meitei people. So likewise, there is also, this sense of insecurity is there in the other, ethnic communities which are present in Manipur. So this is I think the root cause of the various problems in Manipur. Because you see when in a place like in a state, especially in India, when states were being reorganized, so many of the states were being reorganized on the basis of language or like that. So therefore, there is always a very, very dominant community in a particular state. But in a state like Manipur, it's a very, in a very different format. So as a result of that, now in Manipur, what we have been seeing is that the majority, the politically dominant group, the Manipuri or the Meitei group, so there are in favor of, if you go by the so-called the Manipuri insurgency movement, so their main demand has been what is popularly called the secession of Manipur from India. So this is one of the goal of this group. But I don't know how far this movement is active. I'm not very sure. But at the same time, on the other hand, there are also other groups, say as for example, the non-Meitei, say as for example, the Nagas, or for example, the Kukis, also have their own movement. So their movement is, if I have to look at, as I have said, many of these movements in the Northeast are actually, as I have said, these are actually the movement for separate states. Say as for example, in the case of, in exactly what is happening in Manipur is also, say, the Kukis, or even the Naga. So it is more or less in line with the creation of separate state. But now there is a problem in Manipur. You see, many of this movement, either the Naga movement or the Kuki movement, in my view, these are very, very legitimate movement. Very, very legitimate movement. And many of this movement has been going on for the last many, many decades. See, as for example, the Naga movement started around the time of India's independence. In my view, the Naga insurgency is also a very, very legitimate movement. But there are many hurdles. I will always talk to my colleague that, the Naga movement is a very, very unfortunate movement also. Because you see, now everybody, now especially in the government circle, there is a realization that now time has come to resolve the Naga insurgency. So everybody appreciates this. We also appreciate this as a research scholar. But there are various challenges to achieve that, solution. So one of the biggest problems is Manipur. So when I say Manipur, the biggest problem is that I look at Manipur's geography as the problem. You see, the state reorganization in India has taken place. See, Bombay was reorganized to facilitate the creation of Gujarat and Maharashtra. Recently, Andhra Pradesh was reorganized. Assam has been, reorganized. So these reorganizations have taken place. So these are continuing process. Now, why there is a problem in Manipur is that the Manipur geography itself creates lots of hurdles. So this now you must be, some of you must be familiar with especially the Manipuri people who live in the plain areas of Manipur, why they are objecting to various statehood movement. Is that because of the geography? Now, if you look at the topography or the geography of Manipur, is that Manipur is already a small state. It's a very, very small state, right? And in this small state, the plain area is just about some 2,000 square. So the valley area is just 1/10 of the area of Manipur. So this is the problem. So therefore, on the other hand, at least about 60 to 65 people of Manipur live in the plain areas. So therefore now, if you go by the various narratives of this various movement, then if the state, if Manipur has to be reorganized, means in that sense, then at least 90% of Manipur will be, either, become a separate state or union territory or merge to the neighboring, the states of, say, Nagaland or maybe to Mizoram. So therefore, there has been lots of opposition to, especially in the plain areas of Manipur, because of this insecurity and this geography. Say for example, when Andhra Pradesh was reorganized, when Bihar was reorganized, there was no much opposition from the people. But since the situation is very, very different, especially, as I said, in the case of Manipur, as the geography doesn't allow that. So as a result of that, now the biggest hurdle, as I see, in the case of Manipur, in the solution to many of this problem is this geography. So this is the reason why especially the people who live in the plain areas have been strongly opposing. Had Manipur been the size of Arunachal Pradesh or say Arunachal Pradesh, there would not have been much opposition to the demand for the creation of new states. But that is not happening in the case of Manipur. So now, now many people are asking. So some people, even recently, some people also came to me and they asked, what is the solution? So I just want to share this also. Now, what is the solution? Because you see, now even the government of this country, the central government, have realized that if these, as for example, the Naga insurgency is considered, if the Naga insurgency can be resolved, then many of the problems in the northeast will be automatically resolved. This is true. I'm of the view that if the Naga insurgency can be resolved, then many of the problems in the northeast will be resolved forever. So this is what. So therefore, but there are various hurdles, as I have said in the beginning. So now, many people talk about, many things. Many people, either openly or, otherwise. So in my view, one of the, suggestions to this is the reorganization of the territorial constituencies of Manipur. Say Manipur has 60 territorial constituencies, means the 60 MLAs. Out of which 40 constituencies are from the valley area, which is just 10% of Manipur's land. And the rest 20 constituencies represents the hill areas. So now, therefore, what I'm thinking is that you see, in fact, many of this movement, either all kinds of, the so-called identity movement or the insurgency movement, not only in the northeast but also elsewhere in the country, many of these movements are actually also primarily the movement for political power. Because everybody wants, if you, right from India's independence, from state reorganization till today, most communities want to retain or have more political power. Means if they have more political power, means they are, so their people can be represented as ministers or MLAs or chief ministers like that. So I see in that sense. So therefore this political power, I think so therefore, in order to, there has to be realignment of this, the political, this constituency, especially in the state of Manipur. So this is something that as I have been, as a scholar, I have written a little bit on this subject. So now, what I feel is that if I am asked what is the solution to many of these problems, as I said that there are various hurdles, but we have to have some compromise because it's opposing or the conflicting parties have to there has to be some compromise to resolve the crisis. Otherwise, the crisis and the conflict will go on, for many, many years to go on. So therefore, there has to be some compromise. So in order to do this compromise, in my view, one thing which I really require is, which I feel is very, very necessary at this point of time, is the state, territorial constituencies. There is a need for reorganization of states' territorial constituencies, in which I say that at least both the hills and the valley should be equally represented in the state legislative assembly. This is something that which I find is more viable in the Manipur context. So I think I will stop here, and then we will. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amarjit. See, one thing, initially what I planned was to invite officials from the Home Ministry, especially people who are in charge of negotiation between different armed groups and the government of India. But then I got some piece of advice from some friends that once you start inviting government officers, the speakers who you invite them will not be open up. They will be hesitant to talk openly. There will not be any academic conversation. That's why I have given up my initial, thought. Then we have this kind of a better and open academic conversation. I have published several articles and books, and one of the most quoted articles that I have written is on the politics of ethnic conflict in Manipur. So, as much as there are conflicts and competing claims, there are also interests from researchers and scholars around the world. And today we are not trying to find a solution as such, but we are trying to brainstorm academically what can be the future. What future holds, and what do we have? What can we learn from these scholars from different angles and from different perspectives? So having said that, now I would like to invite our third speaker. Before I do that, I would like to make a quick announcement that we have prepared a high tea for everyone, so you will have plenty of food to eat right after the event, so please bear with us if we go a little bit over time. And now let me invite the third speaker, Dr. Thongkulal Haukip, to talk about statehood or territorial council, a boon or bane for Kuki. Kuki is one of the major groups in Manipur. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kipgen, for inviting me for this panel discussion. And I also thank Professor Bhagat and Professor Amarjit for their views. But however, I will differ a little bit from them. Of course, I thank Professor Amarjit for suggesting some certain viable solutions, such as equal representation of both the hills and the Manipur Legislative Assembly, which has been, the delimitation has been due for so many years, since the early 1970s. And India had not done any delimitation after 1973. It was in the last decade that there were attempts to delimit territorial constituencies in different states, but in Manipur that was rejected due to different reasons, competing claims and different other datas that were contested. Professor Bhagat, of course, he has given a clear, view on how this region, frontier region, the region between Burma and India, particularly the northeastern region, came into being. Of course, I endorse many of his views. It's very clear, but I would say that many of the views are, a kind of statist perception of so-called medieval kingdoms and the people who are categorized as, in the recent literature, as non-states people. For instance, there are emerging literatures from the anarchist view, like Scott and others, who are studying this upland, Southeast Asia and others, particularly the northeastern region also. And we can see this so-called people who are not counted in this frontier area. They were governed by themselves, in the sense that they were various republics. The discourse on various republics is also very much known in India also during the British rule, and they were independent in certain areas, and no authority, no external authority controls them. And if any other external, for instance, the anarchist view of non-state people, if any authority, the states, the medieval kingdoms wanted to control these people, they will escape. They are mobile people, they will escape to the hills. However, in recent decades, why do these people choose to demand state? It's particularly because we have the territorialized state systems. For instance, Manipur, Nagaland, and Assam after India became independent. And particularly in the Northeast, state has become a resource. For instance, I would give you an example that many of the northeastern states, not many, all of them are categorized as special category states. And they are given 90% of their funds from the center. And only 10% of the funds has to be raised by the respective states. So all these resources comes from the central government. And having a state or demanding a state has become a resource for them, these people. And, I would start with how Manipur came, how Manipur was categorized after independence. As soon as India became independent, the princely state of Manipur was categorized as Part C state, and along with Tripura, they were not given direct statehood. And I believe that it is because of this long delay, a delay for about 2 decades of giving statehood to Manipur, that a kind of alienation, a kind of deprivation was emerging among the Manipuris, and leading to insurgent groups like the PLA, UNLF, which we found today fighting for sovereignty in the northeastern region. And it was on 8 November 1968 that the Manipur Territorial Congress Committee submitted a memorandum to the central government, the Prime Minister of India, who was Mrs. Indira Gandhi, and also to the President of All India Congress Committee, demanding the grant of statehood to Manipur. And in that memorandum, they believe that it embodies the feelings and aspirations of the people of Manipur as a whole. And the committee, as a unit of the ruling party and running the administration of Manipur, made a comparison with a neighboring area, that is Nagaland, who was given statehood just a decade back. And then they claim that Nagaland was granted statehood. The people of Manipur, more especially those living in the contiguous area of Nagaland, are naturally tempted to go to Nagaland, where they can enjoy greater political rights and greater advantages for development. So, you can find that the Manipur Congress Committee was blaming the kind of political deprivation that was, existing in the state, in the princely state of Manipur, as statehood was not granted, and resulting in separatist and fisherpirous tendencies all around, which was never known before. So they also reiterated that the quotient of economic viability as a criteria to grant statehood does not hold no water after the grant of statehood to Nagaland. So there was the condition or the kind of argument or the kind of political deprivation that Manipur has before it was given statehood. So let me come to the political party or the political organization of the Kukis way back at the time of independence. The Kuki National Assembly was formed on October 24, 1946, along with the backing of the Kuki Chief Association, which is a political association of all the chiefs in the hill areas of Manipur. And they were opposing certain colonial and other kind of, system that was existing, like Pothang, Bega system, and the corrupt hill lambus who were collecting hill house taxes. But at the time of independence, there was a clear consciousness among these members that they declared that taking into consideration the various aspects of the vexing problems of the hills and valley of Manipur, it is the desire of the Kuki National Assembly to announce that the Kuki should come under the state darbar, that is the Manipur state darbar, provided the conditions are satisfactory, but failing to obtain satisfactory condition, the Kukis regretfully will have to follow the footsteps of their brothers, the Nagas, in demanding full cessation. So there was the condition that they should be granted enough kind of autonomy. And when the British paramountcy was lapsed in Manipur, and there was the president of the Manipur State Darbar who was responsible for the working of hill administration. And there was a draft constitution that divided Manipur in two parts. The Manipur State Constitution Act 1947 for the valley, and the Manipur Hill People Administration Regulation Act 1947. In this drafting, the Kuki National Assembly was not invited, and therefore the KNA began to resolve not to be bound by the decisions of the committee unless certain conditions are met. For instance, the problem of solving land alienation of the Kukis, abolition of forced labor, granting of equal rights with the plainsmen. So, until the 1980s, the KNA, which was also a political party in Manipur and a part of the, sometimes a part of the ruling government, had certain demands which continue still the late 1980s. By the late 1980s, there were formation of, insurgent groups like the KNF and KNA. Take, for instance, I have been instrumental in retrieving the article published in Shillong Times in 1993 by this president of this armed group. And in that, I could find some of the reasons why the KNF was formed. Take, for instance, there is a narrative that among the Kukis that if you want to drive a bike, you should start a rebellion, right? And that sentence clearly indicates that there is a kind of, in 3 decades of state of Manipur, there is a kind of developmental disparity between the hills and the valley. So we can find that in that particular article in the Shillong Times, I find that, the president of the KNF was stating that the contributions of the Kukis to freedom struggle is not adequately recognized. He states that the Kukis participated in the Indian National Army led by Subhash Chandra Bose. They have fought an imperialist struggle against the British for 3 years. And all these struggles, subaltern struggles, are not recognized adequately. So we have a kind of political deprivation, economic as well as cultural and educational neglect in that piece. So the KNF was formed on May 18, 1988 in the Indo-Myanmar border called Mulnoi. Likewise, the Kuki National Army was also formed in that same year in that Myanmar side of the border, but very close to Manipur. So, for instance, the Kuki National Organization or the Kuki National Army, they claims to strive for self-determination of Kuki people both in India and Myanmar, which signifies the right of the Kukis to govern their own affairs. So, my question, another question today is that it is about the right to govern themselves. And in India, we have the 6th schedule of the Constitution, which gives the power to the tribal people to govern themselves under, these provisions. We have the district councils under the 6 schedules. But however, these provisions were not extended to the princely state of Manipur and Tripura. However, there were two acts that were passed. For instance, the Manipur Hill Areas District Council Act 1971, and an election was held to these councils in 1973, and which became functional in that year itself. But however, in the first year of its functioning itself, it was found that these councils have no legislative power. They were financially constrained, and if you ask any member of these district councils, they would claim that they are just toothless tigers. Starting in 1978, there is a constitution provisional for Manipur, for the tribals in these areas, that under Article 371C, there is a provision that Manipur should have a hill area committee. And this hill area committee should be looking after the affairs of the hill people. The member of the Legislative Assembly in Manipur would be chosen as the chairman and member of this committee, and any amendments, any legislative and other policies taken by the government would be approved only after the consultation of this committee. But take for instance, in a few years back, there was a very big agitation in the hill areas of Manipur called the 3 bills movement. Manipur passed 3 bills simultaneously without consulting the Hill Area Committee. And that act or that bills affect the hill areas of Manipur. So because of that anger or deprivation in terms of political and other platforms, the people agitated. So in 1991, the Manipur Assembly agreed for certain local adjustment to introduce the 6th schedule of the constitution. For instance, from 1978, there has been a demand in the hill areas of Manipur that 6 schedules should be introduced for these autonomous district councils. But however, it was only in 1991 that it can be introduced with certain local amendments and adjustment. However, the 6th Schedule Demand Committee of Manipur, they rejected, and then they demanded that it should be implemented in a total. Take for instance, for a comparison, the Tripura Tribal Areas Autonomous District Council Act was passed in 1979, about 8 years after the Manipur ADC Act was passed. And it was in 1983 that the first ADC elections were held, and the tribal people in Tripura felt that they have no adequate power under this act, and they demanded to be provided under the 6th schedule of the constitution. And it was granted by the Tripura Legislative Assembly within 2 years of the demand. So take a comparison between Tripura and Manipur, who have different political status before becoming a full-fledged statehood or after becoming. So compare between the tribals in the Manipur and Tripura, then there is, of course, a kind of political deprivation in Manipur that was gaining momentum and alienation thereof. So after the insurgent movement started in Manipur from the late 1980s, particularly in 1987, the KNF and KNA headed the movement both in the Indian side and Myanmar side of the border. And on 22nd August 2018, these two conglomerate of insurgent groups signed a tripartite agreement with the government of India and government of Manipur under the suspension of operations for 1 year to create a positive environment for political dialogue. And since then, for the last 1 decade, there is a continuous dialogue. And then simultaneously in 2010, there was a very political committee called Kuki State Demand Committee was formed to push up the demand for statehood of the Kukis. So today, if we talk about the viability of the statehood or viability of the territorial council, I think as an academician, I'm not here to discuss the viability. It is with the people. The people have to decide and negotiate with the other competing claims. And as I've stated, Northeast India is under the special category states. If you talk about financial and other viability, then it comes from the center. It mainly comes from the center, and it is managed with these financial grants to these states. It's only about 10%, even less than that, that has to be generated within. So today there is a negotiation going on between the Kuki armed groups and the Manipur government on the other hand, and central government for a territorial council. I hope the base kind of outcome would come, and I really wish that peaceful agreement would be arrived soon. We need more peace, development, and education rather than bloodshed and any kind of polarization that is existing in the Northeast. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Haukip. So we have, last but not the least speaker, Mr. Koko. Before I invite him to the podium, I just would like to remind everyone again that we'll be putting together a report, and we'll be sharing with the speakers before we release. Of course, with your approval, we'd like to share this one, and it will be there in YouTube also. And we would like to have your feedback as well after this event is over. So now I would like to invite Mr. Koko to talk about maybe one of the most talked about topic or most contested maybe topic in the past few years, which is a Naga integration. So he being from the Naga community and also being academic, we would like to hear the first-hand information. What do academics think about this issue? What do the people think about the possibility and the challenges? So let me invite Koko to talk about the question of Naga integration, opportunities and challenges.
Thank you, Dr. Kipgen and Jindal University for having me here and giving me this opportunity to share a few thoughts on the Naga issue. Precisely, the question of the Naga integration, opportunities and challenges. Let me start with a metaphor that I recently learned from a veteran Naga activist. The metaphor goes like this. Everyone wants to be the cathead, but none is ready to be the tail of the mighty tiger. So that presents the present scenario of not only the Nagas, but of all the non-state armed groups in the region. And it is also true with the other non-state armed groups across the world. As we can see factions and fragmentations within the movement, it is very natural to any movement. If we look at the India's freedom movement, it was also not free of such fragmentation and factions. So why is it so? Why is it so fragmented? Or why is everyone so opportunistic that they refuse to become a part of the mighty tiger to bring about solution or to come out for common interest? To come back to the region, as discussed earlier also, Manipur is leading the chart in terms of having the most number of non-state armed groups in the region, followed by Assam, Nagaland, and Meghalaya. So as Professor Bhagat has also already mentioned, that there are 32 languages spoken in Manipur, but as per the SATP portal, there are 42 non-state armed groups in the state. So the non-state armed group is more than the language spoken in the state. So, but we need to revisit the Indian state intervention, I would call it intervention in the region. Why the situation is such in the region, or to be specific in Manipur? We need to look at the approaches or strategies adopted by the Indian state when it comes to dealing with the region. Jairam Ramesh, former Environment and Water Resources Minister, has once said this in his speech in the Northeastern Council plenary, that he categorized the approaches into 4, but I would add one more and make it 5. First, he said it was cultural. The approach was cultural on the basis of Elvin Weirder's advice to Nehru. So, wherein the region was exoticized and kept aside as museum with very little interference or intervention from the part of the state. And second, security paradigm after the 1962 Chinese aggression. And then the third, politics paradigm, that is how he called it, which is the reorganizations of the state in the region in particular. And the fourth developmental paradigm, which starts from the 80s till the 90s. So I'll add the third paradigm as act is or look is paradigm. But in all this, there are two major concerns. One is the military approach that the Indian state has adopted. If you look at it, or look at the shifting of paradigms, it is a lot to do with the personal experience that Jawaharlal Nehru had, particularly with the Nagas, because in 1952, when he visited Kohima with the former Premier of Myanmar, Burma then, his speech was boycotted because of some communication gap. That is what the history says, but there are different versions to it. But he was sort of shamed because Kohima is a small town and far away from the so-called mainland India. And when he was about to deliver the speech, everyone walked out of the from the venue except a few government officials. So he voted saying that he will never return to Nagaland again in his life. So true to his word, I'm told, and research says that he never visited Nagaland again. But as a reward to the shaming that was done to him in 1958, the famous Armed Forces Special Power Act was reenacted, which was preceded by the Nagaland Security Act. So that is how the fear of the military personnel were deployed in the region, particularly in Nagaland, and fear psychosis have been created, and psychological distance have also emerged out of it between the native of the Northeast and the rest of India. Also, the second concern is the non-consultation of the stakeholders. Whatever development initiative or policies have been framed here in Delhi for the region, there was hardly with the people from the region involved. So when it comes to implementation, it creates a huge gap between the theory and the reality in the ground. So once the conflict intensified, the government adopted not only divide and divide and rule policy, but also carrot and stick policy, both together. Like special packages was or is still a very relevant policy towards the region. This is how they divide the society. The very fact that Nagaland state came into existence is also in line with that policy, because majority of the Nagas were kept out of the Nagaland state. So that is partially the reason why the conflict is continuing in Manipur, in Myanmar. Of course, Myanmar was out of the jurisdiction of the Indian state, but the way how Professor Bhagat had mentioned earlier, in the present chief of the Colonial, his house is divided by the international boundary. His bedroom is in India, kitchen is in Myanmar. So the arbitrary nature of drawing boundaries also has its own role in terms of contributing to the intractable conflict that we have in the region today. So I would call this as a flawed model of nation building on the part of the Indian state. Because of that, all this, we have now over 100 non-state armed groups in the region. And if this has been differently tackled or dealt with, then I think the situation would have been much different today. As we all are aware, except for part of Assam, the rest were not even part of the narrative of the India's freedom movement. So to bring them into the Indian state, why the Meitei Kings or the other tribes are asking for independence from India was because they were not made to become or become part of the Indian state narrative. So with this in the background, let me just come specific to the Naga issues. I would assume that we all have the basic knowledge about the Nagas. So let me start with a question. Was there an integrated Naga nation at a certain point of time in history, in the past? It is, my answer would be both yes and no. Yes, because they have full control over their territory, socio-economic and political affairs. This is typically from the non-Western or Westphalian notion of nation-state. So, and no. Why? Because if you were to look at it again from that Western concept of nation and national or nation-state, it is not. So I'll leave it to you to decide whether it is yes or no. So to browse through cursorily the history of the Naga movement, like consolidation of the Naga consciousness formally started in line with the Western notion of nation-state in 1918 with the formation of the Naga Club by those people who have served in the French front of the British Labour Corps. But of course, with the help of the British officials, sympathizers. So, but the way the narrative was constructed was amazingly done, that the response of the Nagas was overwhelming, in the sense that they responded positively and they could garner the support of all the Nagas, irrespective of the geographical location and the differences in their dialect within. And there is a saying about the Nagas that they have as much differences as the similarities they share. So, but one common or one pertinent issue here is the common root that they share. So 70% of the Nagas have somewhere or the other the connection with the Mike Hill village, or they trace their origin to Mike Hill village in Manipur. Though many have sort of no longer trace their origin to Mike Hill, but until a point of time, 70% of the Nagas claim that they have migrated through that Mike Hill village of Manipur. So that makes it very convenient for them to come together, as I said, irrespective of the differences they have with each other. So the Nagas are a nation, and Naga nationalism can be sort of understood with much clarity if we look at it, look at the concepts of ethno-symbolism and ethnic as propounded by Anthony D. Smith. The basic idea is it is not what outsiders perceived, but the feeling of belongingness by the members of the group is what is matter. So, irrespective of the differences, today if you ask a Naga, he will proudly identify himself as a Naga, irrespective of the differences that they have in the home front, the differences between the Nagas of Nagaland state, the Nagas of Manipur, the Nagas of Myanmar. But they'll still be happily or proudly identify themselves as Nagas. To conclude, let me broadly put out some opportunities as well as the challenges that the Nagas are facing today in terms of their assertion or their aspiration to be integrated. So I would say they have the requisite elements or materials to be integrated. Legally speaking, Article 2 and 3 of the Constitution is very clear. Moreover, in addition to this, they have 16-point agreement, which is the basis of the formation of the present Nagaland state, which has a provision which says that in due course of time, the Naga inhabited areas will be integrated. That is a legal document which is honored by both the Indian state and the Nagas. That's why the state is in existence. So if these areas are explored, then there are possibilities in it. And secondly, socially, ethnically, as I mentioned, they belong to the same racial stock. The movement is ongoing, and despite of the differences, the movement is participated by different Naga tribes. And thirdly, territorially, this is to do with territoriality. It is contiguous, and also the land that the Nagas are inhabiting today belongs to them. They're not inhabiting on anyone else's land. Say, for example, not on the Meitei's land or the Assamese land or the Kuki's land. So those contiguous areas can be integrated even territorially. And politically, the ongoing movement is on, and as I said, it is participated from across the tribes. Despite of the fragmentation within, you'll find each Naga tribe members in each faction, so in all the factions. So those are the possibilities or the opportunities that they have. And the challenges today the challenges to the Naga movement is not the Indian state or the government of India, but it is the awakened neighbors, I would put it in that way. Awoken neighbors in the sense that the Meiteis were nowhere in 1964 when the Naga had peace talk with Indira Gandhi, the then Prime Minister. The Assamese were nowhere. They were not opposing to what the Nagas were demanding. They have their own set of demands, or they were not even demanding anything, if you are to talk about the Assamese. So the trap perception, or the trap, like perceived trap has emerged out of the way the importance was given to the Naga issue. I'm sure you all are aware that the Naga issue was handled by Ministry of External Affairs till 1972. Then it was, after 72, it was transferred to the Ministry of Home Affairs. So when I talk about the flawed model of nation building, that also includes, that also part of it. If they have devised it properly, they wouldn't have made such mistake. Dealing in its own citizen through Ministry of External Affairs is a little absurd here. So it is clear. And I would call it, coming back to the awoken neighbors, like the Meiteis and the Assamese are no doubt intellectually much advanced than the other communities in the region, but somehow politically subjugated and suppressed, because they are under monarchy system, which is more hers in terms of punishing the dissenting voice, or in terms of suppressing the dissenting voice. So they started only in the 60s, whereas the Nagas started negotiating with the Prime Minister of India since 1964. But coming back to the difficulties, challenges again, the lack of political will was the problem. Why the conflict are still lingering? Because due to the lack of political will from the Indian leadership, I would call it, because there were many opportunities. Of course, the Nagas were too stubborn. When they negotiated with Indira Gandhi, they were offered the status similar to that of Bhutan, where defense will be taken care of by the Indian state, but they can have flats and constitution, over which now today in the ongoing negotiation, it has created a huge hurdle to progress further. So due to this lack of political will, many opportunities have been missed. And but if you are to look at it from a different perspective, Indian state has been very successful in terms of tackling with the militancy problem in the region. Because today, if you look at it, the so-called mother of insurgency, the Naga group, is negotiating with this Indian state. As it is considered as the mother of all insurgency in the region, the flow of arms and other activities across the border has been thoroughly checked. And almost all the non-state armed groups in the regions have been thoroughly weakened post-1997. That is the year where NSNIN started negotiating with the government of India. So one of the major challenges is that the never-ending peace talks. For how long do you think is idle or to go on with the talks. What kind of example are we giving, are we showing to the other groups which are not negotiating with the Indian state today? So if there is political will, something or the other should have been brought about and imposed on it if people are not taking it, or do something to bring about change in the region, because with this prolonged peace talk and conflict, the very fabric of the society has been deeply affected. Now you go and see the road condition in Manipur. We are here in Delhi, we often talk about UP and Bihar, but Manipur and Nagaland, they never get the limelight of the media from the so-called mainstream India. Otherwise, these two states will be the most corrupt states in India, which will, they can beat UP and Bihar in terms of corruption. So to look at it from within the Naga society, the multiple fragmentation is the biggest challenge to tackle today. But how these things have come about is also, again, very interesting in a way, because we talk about special economic packages or military civic programs. All these have taken over and undermined the civil administration. So instead of strengthening the civil administration and to make the people feel that they're part of the state or they're part of the system, they have undermined the civil administration, that it has, now the people lack faith on the system. So the biggest challenge is, yes, to tackle with the misgovernance that has been going on for decades now. Then if this is addressed, I'm sure if you go to Nagaland today, you'll see people hosting Indian flag proudly in their cars, which was like unimaginable prior to 1997, to be very specific. The violence in terms of armed combat or conflict has come down totally, but the gap between the rich and the poor has gone up so much. And basic facilities like healthcare system, education is in a shambles. So if these things are taken care of today, they will somehow be able to connect themselves with the system, and I'm sure not drastic change, but gradual change can come about with such action. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Coco. So we have a few minutes for Q&A session. The reason why, as I said, some of you are coming late, let me repeat myself. The reason why I invited these scholars is because the Métis, the Nagas, the Kukis are the three communities you will find across the border, both in their side of the border and from within Myanmar as well. Most of them have talked about the perspective of India. Let me spend maybe a couple of minutes from the perspective of Myanmar to give you what happens across the border. As I said in my introduction, Métis, Kukis, and Nagas, all these communities are under one nomenclature in Myanmar. Under the Chin, there are 135 different ethnic or national races in Myanmar, and Chin alone has 53 groups. And all these groups of people, the Chin, Kukis, the Nagas, and the Métis, all belong to the Chin nomenclature. But if you cross the border and come the other side, of course, some groups, some clans, or some tribes, if you travel across that part of the region, especially Manipur, some people who belong to the same tribe or the same clan, some of them would claim to be within the Naga fold, some would claim to be within the Kuki fold, and if you trace the the origin of some of the people, some Métis or some Kukis or Nagas would trace their history back within the Métis society, or vice versa. It's so complicated. But again, at the same time, due to different regions, what the speakers have talked about, they all demand for different regions. And of course, in Myanmar, there's one group called the Kuki National Army, which was originally part of the larger umbrella of Kuki National Organization, but now separately they are asking for their own statehood. Of course, they are in the initial stage. And the Naga, similarly, I think we all know about the IM, but the Kablang group, they are based inside Myanmar, and they are having a ceasefire with the Myanmar government. And they also want of course, they have their self-administered zone within the country. They want more, and they are negotiating with the Myanmar government. And the Métis, of course, you know, many of you know, they do not officially demand, have official demand within the Myanmar government, but many of them are based within inside Myanmar, and they, of course, have their political movement across the border. And so these are the things which make the issue more complicated. And now I would like to open the floor because we have about 15 minutes or so. And then, so who wants to go first? Okay, please identify yourself and briefly. Where are you? What's your name? Where are you from? And I will ask, okay, you have your mic there. You can turn on your mic. And please, the speakers, whoever he's addressing, use the mic and please respond. I would like to invite 3 questions first. Okay, yeah.
My first question is to Professor Koko. With regard to the Naga issue, you mentioned that the biggest problem is the metaphor that you mentioned was pretty interesting, and you mentioned that the biggest challenge is multiple fragmentation and factionalism. While there is no denying that the flawed model of nation building with regard to India has proliferated the insurgency in Nagaland, there have been efforts such as the Positive Nagaland Initiative and the organizations such as YouthNet, which are helping people like youth from Nagaland to get employment in other parts of India. And there is a considerable outflow of Naga youth.
Can you make your question short?
Yes.
What's your name? Do you identify yourself?
I did not.
Please
my
identify
name is
yourself.
Shriyank. I am a second-year master's student from Jindal Global University. I'm studying international affairs. These efforts, which have a considerable outflow of Naga youth for sake of employment, and the return of these Naga youth as well for vocational training and skill development initiatives. Do you think that will cause a certain change and a narrative towards integration and affect the elites in Hebron and Mount Gilead?
All right, next question. Okay, let's go first. Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Kipgin, for having this discussion. I think it's essential that in Delhi we have such a discussion, so thank you for that. My name is Shrabana, and I am a PhD scholar from JNU. I have 3 very generic things in mind which I wish the panel would touch upon. One is to do with connectivity. Dr. Oina mentioned about how in Manipur there were, the king was trying to construct road back in colonial times. My question is there some harm done to connectivity projects when it comes to contested identities and the insurgencies that happen? What are we doing with our connectivity projects with Myanmar in particular, which then goes up to China? Because that also falls under the realm of security. First question is that. The second question is there also, we talked about a lot of ethnic and cultural and basically, is there a religious contested identity as well? Because in Myanmar, we see the Buddhist and the Hindus, and there's a contestation in terms of religion as well. This is an open question, whoever wishes to answer. And the third question is to do with foreign interference from China. We also know that the Communist Party in Burma was divided, and there were 4 ethnic groups that went on the war, army, the KIA, and so on. So I think Dr. Kipgen touched upon it at the end. So in terms of India's ethnic and insurgent groups cooperating, or is there sort of some connection between the 2 countries and their insurgent groups? Thank you.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. I have been Dr. Kipren's student in the Jindal School of International Affairs. My name is Karmanya Thadani. I noticed something very stark. Professor Oinam's presentation actually started on the note that, people from the Northeast can settle in other parts of India, and the Indian nation state and the Myanmarese nation states are a reality, and therefore we have to work within that reality. And moreover, he also mentioned that the Act East policy and some development initiatives in the Northeast are yielding some good results. While acknowledging everything he said, there is a dimension that yes, the Indian nation state culturally, I think even more than economically, has alienated the Northeast for a very long period of time, a fact which cannot be completely brushed aside. On the other hand, we had, Dr. Kokho telling us about the blunders that the Indian state made, and that ties into the 2 questions that were asked earlier. Now, in that context, while you did mention, sir, that the Nagas were also stubborn when they were offered a lot of autonomy and they rejected it at that point of time, still there remains the fact that the Naga insurgents have committed a lot of human rights violations, like shooting at civilians, at MLAs, shooting at Kuki civilians, and so on. So I think there is a need for introspection and a recognition of truths on both sides. And I think that ties into what everyone spoke over here. I think there are multiple narratives and multiple truths, and they all need to be acknowledged. What happens is very often people of one side try to please a certain section of the audience. So if I may say so, I'm being very blunt. How do we actually sort this out, wherein we work with real nation states, we work with real politics, but at the same time we do justice without overly romanticizing anti-state movements because it's intellectually fashionable to do so in some circles? And that also ties into the question about religion, because there is the fact that the NSCN uses slogans like Nagaland for Christ, and the very tiny animist minority is still prevalent within the Nagas. They do feel stifled at times in some contexts. Even a library named after Rani Gaidanliu runs into trouble because some fanatics don't want it. So how do we actually sort this out, and how do we address all sides of the issue? Thank you.
All right. So who wants to go first? Please. Yep. I think you have some tough questions.
Let me
Yep.
begin with his question. Yes, if we are to pick faults of the different agencies involved, then we will not be able to do justice. And the issue is not as simple as we see. And that is the reason why it has been going on for decades, half a century at least. So I think I'll put it that way. And yes, coming back to my friend's question, yes, there are many positive efforts being made by different groups, civil society groups. And yes, they're making a huge impact, but we should be warned of taking off responsibilities from the state agencies or from the state government, how it is failing, and the kind of services catered to the people, to the youth by the civil society organizations are minuscule in a way. Also, the nature of job or opportunities created by such organizations are mostly middle rank kind of job, which which have impact and which will continue to have an impact, but a kind of long-term infrastructure or facilities should be put in place, or the basic facilities which is lacking in the state. So, yeah, thank you.
Yep. Who wants to go next?
I think Amarjit could also speak a bit, then I want to be politically correct, not to speak much.
I mean, I mean, I appreciate all the, I mean, your comments also, and that is true. But at the same time, as Coco has already stated, the issues. I mean, especially, I mean, in this, these issues are very, I mean, I will say that it's a very complex. And at the same time, I mean, actually, I mean, I don't necessarily blame the center or the central government for all the ills in the Northeast. Because, you see, what I always believe in what the State Reorganization Commission have stated in 1952-53. So, you see, many of the states in the Northeast, most of the states, except for Assam, most of these states are, if you read the State Reorganization Report, the State Reorganization Report has laid down various conditions in which a place or a region become a state. So administrative viability, financial viability, and then geographical contiguity, and so many factors were being laid down by the State Reorganization Commission. But unfortunately, when states were being reorganized, when Assam was divided again and again, right from 1962-63 onwards, so most of the states were not financially viable. So as a result of that, now today what is happening is that now many of the state governments are not able to, is not able to do much, in order to. So therefore, most of these states looks towards Delhi only. So, for all the kinds of, the problem in the Northeast. So now this is one thing which I would like to say. And then at the same time, as, say borders and administrative boundaries. Most of these borders and administrative boundaries were drawn by the colonial masters. Say, as for example, India-Bangladesh border, India-Pakistan border, or India-China border. And so therefore, and at the same time, if you see in various parts of the world, say, as for example, so in the Northeast also, or in Punjab border also, people are always divided by the border. Say, as for example, in the Northeast also, say, or in the India-Myanmar border. So I am not, so likewise, say, the Bengalis are divided by the borders because of the partition of Bengal in 1947. So therefore, I am not surprised, and by this, demarcation of, boundaries, or the administrative boundaries or the border. This is my view. So therefore, there can be Nagas or there can be Meiteis in Myanmar. Why not? So I think there is nothing wrong in that. Then the other thing that, Madam, that what you raised about this, the foreign interference. Now, recently I read a very interesting book on, that is again on the Naga insurgency. So what I see is that and as Coco has also said, that the Naga insurgency, was the mother of all insurgencies. Now everybody have acknowledged that, even the government of India also. So now, you see, the Naga insurgency right from the 1960s. If you read this book, that Kuknamit, written by some scholar. So it's a very interesting, and it tells us about how the Naga insurgents and their connection with China. It's very, very, but that connection ended somewhere in 1971-72. One of the reason can be because the Chinese don't trust the Northeast insurgents. Because as Coco has also said, that the insurgents are always divided. So this is one thing. So thereafter, I think from the 1970s onwards, of course, insurgents do take shelter in Myanmar for various reasons. Because this is for various reasons, because the Myanmar also want to take some, want to do some bargaining with India. So as a result, apart from Myanmar, now, there is no, the Northeast insurgents, they have very limited presence in Bangladesh. Of course, many of them have already been driven out. But China is, it's not, if you really look at, there is not much Chinese involvement. Of course, some insurgents are in Myanmar taking shelter. So that is something which
Well, I don't know, I can just add on to a few things. You are putting this on, so I also don't think that professors are free to speak anything and everything alike. So one is also a little reluctant to speak everything out. See, this whole identity and the fluidity of identity is what I wrote in 2002, where I got the thread to life. Precisely the argument I gave at that point in time in EPW article was that the identities of the smaller communities in the region are fluctuating fast, it's moving, and this fluctuation is not necessarily out of choice, but out of compulsion of the circumstances. And that is well corroborated today when Kibjan says that what you call these three groups fighting with each other, seemingly, there are fights within Nagas, there are fights within, Meiteis, there are fights within Kukis also, and fights of the worst kind happens among brothers. And Mahabharata is the clear example how worse it can happen. So we have seen in the epics how it happened. Because love and the closeness and the fight is all between the neighbors or the dear and near ones. So in Myanmar, if these three communities are seen, whether it is anthropological or political as nomenclature of one cluster, but you find them fluctuated here. I can say the same thing about many communities who are in Manipur, who will call themselves as different identity, but once they are same communities, when they move to Mizoram, they will call themselves as Mijos. Now, this is not to laugh at, seriously speaking, this is not to laugh at. But take me a little more seriously. Epistemologically and ontologically, I am a Buddhist. That there is nothing called permanent being. But the whole point is this identity is a way to look at yourself towards a goal or future that you aim at. When you talk about this community, I am Naga, or I am a Meitei, I am a Bengali, it is not merely about a past lineage, but you also look at how your community is moving towards that. And if you are more stable community, then you have less of a problem. But if you are a small community with a fragile and a violent atmosphere, there is every possibility that you are constantly renegotiating yourself. So identity is one that I would like to submit. Second thing which I wanted to, why did I bring, though how you will say that I am more into medievalist status, yes. But the point is, I wanted to put this into perspective. When you look at the present, you think everything is fixed and permanent. But what you seem to be permanent, like my daughter will talk about Manipur in a way, because she is born here, she knows nothing of that place. So if you tell a story about that, how this parenthesis emerged, how I was, then this will show a longer picture of how we have come into being, right? And that is what I say, the narrative of the nations, narrative of the kingdoms always has been largely of the winners, victors. And those smaller communities, and I would submit here, the anthropology, the definition of tribe is one who has self-sustenance, but who also lives in that level of subsistence. The market economy will not be prevalent among the tribes, because the commodities you create are your own sustenance. You help each other, you barter, you sustain yourself, you don't need others' help. Outsiders' help, minimal. but you can sustain among yourself, but you will not go out. So more the society progresses, then you create commodities to sell, purchase, and I think in that sense, most of the tribes of today in the Northeast are no more tribes, anthropologically speaking. Politically, yes, ST, SC, even my own communities who were general Meiteis, and Manipuri classical dance, first 4 classical dance, Manipuri was included. So you are taking a pride that we have been evolving ourselves. Later on wanted to be OBC, because you know that there is resources, mobilization, governance, then entry points. So if the Kukis and the Nagas are entering through ST, why not we do? So we don't want to do through ST because we have said we have progress. So you say other backward class. Recently now, the Meiteis are saying, no, we are the tribals first. So we want to be ST. There is a fight. Because, once you are ST, my son also will get a job. If I am an OBC, I am in the creamy layer. A professor's son cannot become an OBC, cannot get that entry point. If I become an ST, then my son will get. And more so, if I am in Manipur, I don't have to pay income tax if you are an ST. So there are all kinds of practical logic about this whole identity formulation. It is not merely about fantasizing, but there are concrete, economic, practical, purposeful reasons for claiming someone as this or that. So one needs to be seeing it holistically, not merely about the cultural alone. Because the fact that we are a citizen now in this country, communities are articulated in that citizenship mold into the governance framework, the whole dynamics is all mixed up. At the one side, you are a citizen, modern, but at the another side, you are also primitive, you are culturally this, culturally that, you want to take best out of the system. Now, coming to the connectivity, British never were interested in the Northeast to begin with. And only last few years I learned. I thought, it was that British were helping Christianization in the Northeast. No. British administration and the Christian Presbyterian groups were fighting that you are trying to change them into Christianity. Don't do that. Don't interrupt. So because British administration has a different purpose, the philanthropic, the religious groups have a different interest. For them, it is expansion of your evangelizing narrative or goal. For administration is very clear. They wanted a route trade without much disturbance. And earlier, Konoma was a route trade through Dimapur. Konoma were the worst of the Nagas, strongest. So British found them so difficult that they wanted to change the route. And Meitei king was used to construct this, and all the dirty jobs were done by this is what colonial rule is. So it is infighting among, but they want their trade routes to go. Now, I don't want to go into this, what is right and what is wrong. This is a narrative, it has gone in, it has become national highway. Now international ways are coming in. Is policy that connectivity that is going to increase. Now there will be another form of resistance coming that, these are going to, destroy our this. So you cannot have both. At one level you say, we want to retain. At another level you should say, we are destroying. So one has to negotiate and live with. That is what I was saying, that negotiation is the best way. But at the end of the last point, Indian state has been most successful. What Chanakya Niti that it has done was every organization, non-state, were against the Indian state, secession. So you target the Indian state. But in the last 10 years or so, it is infighting among the non-states, and Indian state is mediator. So I think it has promoted itself into a very successful diplomacy. So I think non-states should learn from this. Thank you.
All right. Initially, Dr. Onam was a little bit hesitant, but now he's becoming more and more open and enthusiastic. So that's a good sign, huh? Since we started about 10 minutes late, I would like to open one more round before we wrap up this discussion. I see 3 hands, 4 hands, but okay, please be precise and make a short question, no comments, okay? All right, I think you would be the last because you already asked. I will put you the last. Okay, these are my students. So, yeah. Gautam, you would like to say something?
But I think, priority should be to your students.
Okay, then we'll give him the last. We'll give him the last. All right, please, Akash, introduce yourself and then make it very short question. Okay.
Hello everyone. Sir, I'll try to make it as short as possible. I am Akash Sahu and I'm also a student of Jindal University, but I'm also attending on behalf of my supervisor who could not be here, who heads the Southeast Asia Center at Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. So the first comment that I have is about the status of relations between the communities on this side of the border and the Myanmarese side of the border. What do we know and what work can we do to establish peace between these relations? Because our connectivity to Southeast Asia, which is very much linked to the land border with Myanmar, it's very important that we have peace between these communities. And the point of NRC that you raised, I think the government realizes that the objectives that it had set out has not been achieved. And as he said that it's not permanent, the status of people in the area. So it's a very costly exercise. The government might not want to do it. But the documentation of the tribes will eventually become greater in magnitude as we want to study the communities and their relations. I wanted to ask what role would the RCEP and the membership of India would play in the economic integration of the region with Myanmar. The second comment that I have is about the non-state armed groups in the region. I think we should admit that if such groups are taking up arms, it's the failure of the state administration. And it's okay to admit such mistakes because that is how I think the first step to rectifying such mistakes. I feel that it's very concerning because there are so many non-state armed groups.
Sorry, may I interrupt you? Can you make it short? Okay?
Sir, I'm almost about to complete. Okay. So, sir, is there any way to disarming the groups and also engaging with them peacefully? Because if there is more spread of arms, it is very difficult for us to keep the region in control. And if there are pockets of Naga ethnicity in other states, it will be very difficult to territorially integrate them. So it's a better way that we engage with them through special packages that we could do.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Good evening. So my name is Rohan, and I'm in the second year of Masters in Jindal as well. So it's a little tough to keep the question short. The topic's really interesting, but I'll try my best.
Okay.
So I want to go off of something that Professor Koko said. He mentioned this concept of Westphalian nation building and the state and nation building in India in general. Westphalian topic is my favorite topic. So why don't we move away from Westphalian? How do we? Westphalian looks at just states and political identities. Why don't we go to the local levels and the grassroots levels, and how can we try to understand three eyes of the region? What is the independence that the people want? Do they want to be isolated? Do they want to be integrated? This is something that how can we as locals understand the locals of the area instead of just always dealing with policies, constitutions, articles, and government officials?
Okay, right. Okay, Ankit, yep.
My name is Ankit. I've already completed my bachelor's in international relations. I'm reading law now, but identity politics, and especially what Professor Singh, what you said, is that identity movements always transform into a movement of separate states leading towards an independence movement. That is absolutely right. But your solution is where I find it to be a little dicey, because you want further bifurcation of the constituencies. Bifurcation in itself is synonymous to the idea of bordering. And if you create a border, you create another identity. In the sense, is the solution, with all due respect to you, not adding more fuel to fire? Just a general thought.
Right. Yeah. Make it short, okay?
Yeah. My name is Shriyank. My second question is to Professor Haukip with regard to the 6th schedule. You spoke about the 6th schedule being implemented in, like if it were if it were properly implemented in Manipur, it would be effective. With regard to the state of Assam, the governor of the state of Assam, J.B. Patnaik, observed in 2011 that the sixth schedule has been a gross failure because of inadequate decentralization of power and rampant corruption. So how well viable do you think the application of the sixth schedule is to the state of Manipur, or do the sixth schedule guidelines need to be reworked themselves in order for them to be not as toothless as they are?
Okay. All right. Can I hold on one second? Any ladies? Anybody wants to say something? A question? Yeah. So sorry. Yeah. Please. Make it short, okay?
Yeah, I just want to ask the panel,
Please introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm Sivilana Somi. I'm from JNU, PhD scholar. So I just want to ask the panel that, yeah, I do agree that the Northeast crisis is a mismanagement of the colonial, post-colonial, state making. And so I just want to ask, in the current context, can we, talk about, do you see a shift away from the identity, crisis, or the identity issues to development issues, because Northeast has always been framed from insurgency, security perspective. So do you see a shift away, to the development issues, talking about active policy, infrastructure development, connectivity issues, etc.? Or do you see a more vexed, identity crisis coming up? Do you foresee, a more complex identity crisis, especially in the context of CAB implementation, etc.? Thank you.
Make it short. Yeah.
Very short. Sure. At the outset, you had mentioned, Professor Inam, in fact, you had started with that you wrote an article in EPW and you got into trouble with militant groups who gave you death threats for what you wrote. I know this sounds like a personal question, but it's not. It's important to the discussion, it's important to the discourse we want to have. How free do people feel to express themselves in the Northeast? There is the pressure of the Indian state as well, but that apart, when you have militants, gun-toting militants all around, how free do you feel to actually express solutions, or else you'll be tagged as a traitor to your ethnicity? That's the question. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay. See, speakers, my students have some tough questions for you. So now I would like you to respond. So who wants to go first? Maybe this is the last round. Then I will ask Ambassador Gautam to say some words. And you want to say something, or maybe I'll give you maybe a couple of minutes, right? Yeah. Here's the former Vice Chancellor of ICFA University, Mizoram, Dr. A.K. and Lieutenant General and Dr. A.K. Misra. I will also want you to say a few words afterward. So would you like to respond?
Yeah. With the first question, is it possible to de-arm the people or the non-state armed groups? And also about the economic packages. Yeah. To de-arm the non-state organization, armed groups, at this point will be difficult. Unless you bring all the groups to the negotiating table and sort out or worked out a resolution, it will not be possible because they're still in the round or they're still underground. So the state does not have control over their activities. And secondly, you asked about the economic packages to sort of bring them to or integrate them to the so-called mainstream. Economic packages is a sort of mechanism devised by the Congress and is followed by even the present BJP-led government. This is interesting. Recently or lately I've been looking at these issues. I'm doing some research and it is interesting to know or to learn that this has been devised so as to fill the party coffers. If you give economic packages to the region, it comes back to the party coffers by means of giving out contracts to different firms and organizations. So this is not the best option. because it has failed. Otherwise, special economic packages have been given out to the northeastern states, and these have been used not only to strengthen the political parties within the Indian state, but also it is indirectly helping the organizations or non-state armed groups to make money for themselves. Because if any project comes, then they have their share. There is a joke in Manipur with the former chief minister, Ibo be seen as 10% chief minister. That means whatever schemes or projects comes to the state, he takes 10% of it. So it may not be the best way out. And secondly, yes, how do we go out of the, or come out from the addiction to the Westphalian notion of nation state? I think that problem we're still grappling with, because we are unable to understand the concept or the notion of state or nation state from the perspective of the locals there. That's what, when I said where the Nagas integrated at a point of time, it is both yes and no. Because from their own notion, they were independent. They were free from any outside control. And they have full control over their territory, socio-economic, political. So that part needs to be explored further to make the so-called policy makers to understand them from their point of view, from the opponents or from the native points of view. Thank you.
Yeah, on the question of whether sixth schedule could be a solution to the tribals in Manipur, I cannot put a comment on any people, aspiration for autonomy, because autonomy is a continuous process. And it has to be negotiated as per the time. However, I have already made an analogy of how the Manipuris, particularly the Manipur Territorial Congress Committee in 1968, was dreaming about the condition of Nagaland, who were already declared statehood about 8 years back. And they have been attracting many of the Nagas who are in Manipur territory and who are dreaming of becoming or moving to the state of Nagaland. So it's like a kind of development disparities there, while within the gap of, even in political aspirations, there is already a gap within a decade. So it has generated a kind of dissatisfaction among the Manipuris also. Many many insurgent groups were already born. For instance, Irabot, who is a communist leader of the valley, he has started underground movement already. So I'm talking about granting autonomy, aspirations earlier could have prevented many of the kind of alienation that was creeping on the minds of the elites of these communities. Likewise, it was way back in 1978 that the Hill Area Committee of Manipur was recommending to the Manipur Assembly that sixth schedule should be granted to the ADCs of Manipur. And it has reiterated that standpoint several times in the 90s and even after 2000 also. So maybe in 125th Amendment Bill 2019 in February, most of the ADCs are now converted into territorial councils. For instance, Dima Hasao, Karbi Anglong, and others would be given more power, enormous power now. The conflicts in Manipur were started mainly in the 80s, late 80s, and it was full-fledged, full-blown conflict in the 90s, whether it be between several tribal groups or between other groups. Given the condition, had some kind of self-rule, a little more powerful autonomy was given to this district council in Senapati, in Sadar Hills, and Churachandpur, then conflict in the 90s could have been, I don't say it can be controlled, but it could have been prevented in some, degree. And this kind of developmental disparity that is existing on, because there was a protest by the Hill people in Manipur that unless you give sixth schedule, there will be no elections in the hill areas. So from 1987 till 2008, 2010, there was no ADCs functioning. And any kind of developmental activities were, stopped during those 20 years of the non-functional ADCs. So, granting during those times could have, averted some kind of, disparity as well as a kind of alienation that has been generated among the Hill people.
I'll just briefly, just one or two. The first one, there are some talks about the peace talks. Say the peace talk, say as for example, peace talk or peace agreement, so these are very, very political subject. So there can be a peace talk between one country and another, or say, especially in this case, this is a peace, the so-called peace talk between the state, that is the government, and the other, opposition group. So therefore now you see the peace agreement or the so-called peace accord anywhere within, in any internal domestic, situation, it's the peace agreement is all about imposing the will of the state. At the end of the day, it is the state which imposes its sovereign power on the opposition group. So likewise, say as for example, say within India, say as for example, there has been lots of peace agreement between the government and other groups. So when the negotiation started, it was all about the other groups, their demands was independent from India. Say as for example, the Mizos. At the end of the day, the Mizos signed an agreement for the creation of a separate state within the Indian state. So likewise, in 2003 also, say the Bodos, they started with the state, an independent Bodoland. Ultimately, they came down to a separate state. Then, in due course of time, they settled down to what is called, the autonomous under the 6th schedule of the constitution. So therefore, I see this peace talk as a very, very, it's a very, very political. And at the same time, what do you mean by peace? From the government point of view, say as for example, if you see the annual report of the Home Ministry or, suppose, now as a research scholar, say as a student of sociology, we see peace in a very different way. But there is also one way of looking at peace. From one side is that if there is no violence, then it's peaceful. See, this is so this is something that, and the other that Madam has asked about this identity issues, and then why cannot we move to development? This is a very, very complex, as I see, especially in the case of the Northeast. Because as I have said in the beginning, now in the Northeast, now almost all the communities has a perceived or real, insecurity. Say, as for example, say in Manipur or in Assam, even the dominant group, there is a sense of insecurity. Because the so-called dominant group in the Northeast, maybe in Assam or in Meghalaya or in Manipur. Now, a dominant group, when a dominant group control both political and economic power, then they consider them as very safe and stable. But whereas in the case of the Northeast, so none of this group do not control political and economic power at the same time. They might have controlled the political power, but the economy is controlled by some other group. Say, as for example, in Manipur also, let's say the Manipuris. I am also a Manipuri, right? So now the Manipuris, technically speaking, they control the politics of within the state of Manipur. Politically, they control the politics. But economically, the economic power is controlled by some other groups. So therefore, this is the situation, so therefore, so as a result of that, this identity politics, this is nothing new because identity politics happen everywhere on this globe. There is identity politics in Karnataka, in Bangalore, Karnataka, or in Maharashtra. But the way this identity is being used for political mobilization differ from one place to another. But in the case of the Northeast, is that there is, this is very, very disturbing situation. So this is what I see, and when I said about, because we all have been talking and discussing about, but we also thought that, especially in the case of Manipur. Now, you see, Manipur, is a state, it's a very, very small state, and there has been lots of problems, Most of us who live in Delhi, the news, we all have been, whatever news that we are getting about Manipur is all about the negative news about Manipur, say violence, insurgency, this and that. Hardly none of this, good news are hardly, come out. So what I see is, when I said that is that it is about the, the rearrangement of the territorial constituencies. That is what I said. Say, for example, now you see, many of this movement are also actually the struggle for political power. Every group want to become chief minister or minister. That is for sure. Every group. So now what I'm saying is that some group have more power, some more political power. So in the case of Manipur, one of the grievances is also that, you see, that in Manipur there is a plain valley area, which is just 10% of the land of Manipur, where this small area has about 70% of the state legislature comes from this area. So therefore, so my idea was that, there is need for some, rearrangement. That is what I said. Anyway, we will discuss later.
It is more or less interesting.
Okay.
To speak, issues are.
You want to say, or it's up to you?
We can hear.
Okay. All right. It's good because we are running out of time, and I would like to invite Dr. A.K. Misra and Gautam Kupadia to say maybe just 2 words, 2 minutes each. Is it okay? So, Dr. A.K. Misra, please start. 2
Thank you
minutes.
so very much. Actually, since Ambassador is here, I should not have been speaking, but since I've been in Mizoram for last 2.5 years as the Vice Chancellor.
Excuse me, they want to capture you. Will you mind standing up and holding this mic?
So you can come here.
Because it's a live streaming, and he wants to see your face.
Thank you so much. Since the Ambassador is here, I'll be very short, and we want to hear, since he's such a wise man, and he has been to our university twice. I'll just share my experience of Mizoram. I'm from Army, but then I could have talked on Northeast because having served over there for the counterinsurgency operations or even on the China border, but that's some other day. I'll just share what I saw in Mizoram because that has not got covered because the panel also being not from Mizoram. What I saw over there when I went there in 2016, that time Congress was in power, and I found that church, of course, has a very dominant role there, but it is the NGOs which are very, I would say, in a positive way also contributing to the upliftment of the standard of life and the society as such. And in that, I would say the YMA, that is the Young Mizo Association, is very powerful. And I'll just give you one. So why I said was Congress was in power, and 2018 with the elections, and you would have heard that the election commission, now who was there, he was unceremoniously removed because there was a great protest by the Mizos against the election. They thought that he was being biased because the voter list, when it was being updated and the brews being brought in, or whatever controversy happened, I'll not go into that one. And all the Mizos came on the street, irrespective of their allegiance with whatever. It was the NGOs coordination committee which brought all these Mizos, and the Aizawl was choked, the streets were choked for next, say, 2 days, and ultimately he was removed, and then somebody else was brought in, and thereafter there were very peaceful elections, and the MNF came back to power. Okay, now then the other thing that I saw was that they saw, I think it was the 18th of December, that the chief minister and with this cabinet, they took the oath in Raj Bhavan. I was also present over there. And 26th January, Republic Day, was just within 1 month, and it was boycotted. So when you mentioned that Jawaharlal Nehru felt slighted and he said, I will never come back, there was only the governor, there were only the cabinet, because since naturally they have taken the oath, the chief minister, and I could just manage, because the secretary to the governor saw me that I was trying to go at the gate and I was not being allowed, so I could just barely enter. So I'm just giving you how the changes have taken place thereafter. And then we had organized one tri-nation conference of Bangladesh, India, Bangladesh and Myanmar, for which ambassador and also the professor was there. What I want to share is that when we say of the India, Myanmar and the border region, Myanmar also has border with Bangladesh. And I found that they were shy of facing each other. The High Commission, or the Assistant High Commissioner from Guwahati, he came. But at the last minute, the minister from the Chin state, in fact, ambassador was very kind. With his help, we were able to get him on the road, and we were waiting with the transport, and at 8 o'clock in the evening, we told that he's not coming. So I don't want to make any comment, but this is what I saw happen over there. So then we, of course, went through this tri-nation conference. And so when this question of the religion, I just mentioned Rohingyas, I'll not say anything more, but then since the border is there, so this is what I just wanted to share with you all, having been there, and of course we want to hear the ambassador now. Thank you so much.
Gautam, will you please come over? No, we want to see your face. Is it okay? No, will you mind coming? Yeah, it's better. Yeah.
Thank you, Negun Pao. I think, you're in danger of opening a Pandora's box after such an interesting discussion. I'm really here, unlike most of you here, most of at least the panelists who are all natives who've spent their whole lifetime out of the Northeast. I'm an outsider and, very much a student, just like all your students, also trying to learn about the Northeast. And of course, this conversation has been very, very interesting, very stimulating. I have, lots of questions that have come out of that. But obviously, I don't want to, it's already past 5:30, I don't want to delay you much longer. So I'll just make a couple of little observations. One is just, I think, the kind of academic space that you are able to provide where you are, and to be able to have this kind of conversation. Very much outside, many of these conversations would take on a very political and sometimes ethnic character. So I think this space for a civilized discourse on perceptions, differences, politics is a very, very important space. And I think, congratulations to you and to the Jindal University for having created that space for a reasoned, sober, dispassionate debate over things that can actually be very, emotive outside. And I think, there are so many points that each of the speakers rose that I could flag, again, more as questions to think about in future. But there are 2 points that came out of Professor Amarjeet and also Assistant Professor Koko's talk that I think I tried to link and just raise, once again, a question for all of us to think about. Amarjeet raised this whole question about the 1954 states reorganization and this, eventually what was a fragmentation of the old Assam state into several states. And then this whole question of viability. And I think the point that was made was, about Part C state, about 90% of the funding coming from the center. And I think Coco also made this very, very valid point that, in many ways, the states have been found deficient. And because they've been found deficient, the center has stepped in with special economic packages. And effectively, what they have done is that state capacity has been even further diminished. Instead of actually strengthening state capacity, they've even further diminished state capacity. They've replaced it with all kinds of programs. Those programs are not always sustainable because they go in phases, phase 1, phase 2, so you cannot really plan for the long term. And even programs that are successful, that are good, eventually cannot be sustained because at some point the budget is turned off. And there is an entire state machinery that exists, which is in effect effectively discredited as part of this process, and it doesn't really contribute to that kind of sustainability that in the first place you set out to ensure. Now, just step back a little and go back to this whole question of states reorganization and this dependence. And I think one of the fundamental sources of corruption, and I think Coco flagged this point, is precisely this very heavy central funding. The heavy central funding has actually created a system of graft all the way from the top to the bottom, which brings in state agencies as well as non-state agencies and the insurgent groups. So everybody is part of a system of graft that actually originates in some ways from dependency on the center. I think center is not being malicious in providing this kind of funding, but the fact is that you have created a dependency. Now, the whole point is this, that if you look at the Northeast, by no stretch of imagination is it an impoverished region of India. It's naturally bountiful. If you consider wealth, the biggest sources of wealth are water, sun, air, the best air perhaps in the country, water, masses of water, sun, forests, rivers. It is wealthy. And it has, forget natural resources, because the question of extraction and exploitation of natural resources is another big environmental issue. But just take in terms of the natural produce of the land, just the abundance of, let's say, fish or forest products and so on. What earthly reason is there for the Northeast to be centrally dependent? Yes, there are problems of politics, there are problems of geography, there are problems of partition. I think partition has been a big factor in making the Northeast a little, dependent. But essentially, it ultimately comes down to the states themselves or the region. And one of the problems with this whole fragmentation has been that the Northeast has now been fragmented into states. Politics and development follows the model and the parameters of the state. And this entire vision of the Northeast as a region has disappeared. In fact, we need to, in some ways, get back the regional vision. And the regional vision is not limited to the region as in the states of the Indian Union. The regional vision is a geographic vision. It has the mountains, it has the river valleys, the basins. All the rivers of the Northeast discharge into the Bay of Bengal, right? And therefore the natural economy, the transport corridors also follow the natural contours of geography. And yet all this area has been politically in some ways subdivided, and we have contributed to it further by the political fragmentation of the Northeast. So in some sense, until we recover a kind of regional vision, you will not be sustainable. And most important, we talk about big projects, connectivity projects, big capital, big money, big hydro power projects, big government. But 70 to 80% of the people of the Northeast, like 60 to 70% of the people all over the country, live off land, water, forests, and livestock. And we are really not investing in precisely those, 80% of the people and what they do for their livelihoods: land, water, forests, and livestock. So I would say that, one of the things that we need to start thinking about now is forget, connectivity and all that is there, but focus on people and focus on the environment and focus on the region as a much bigger entity, and then see, where this can lead. And I'm absolutely sure that this deficit that we are talking about, this development deficit, this dependence on the center, it's all because we have not focused on the productivity of the people. Okay, there are challenges there also. This is a very different subject. But it is in that context, it is in the context of deprivation that even identity issues, very good question that you asked, that identity issues become so, aggravated. And it's another question, is identity a product of deprivation, or is, in fact, is development creates a greater, quest for identity because of resources, as you mentioned? I think these are all very interlinked questions. But yeah, I think I just end with, I think, those comments that we need to interrogate, I think, some of the basic fundamentals. And I think central to that is the fact that the Northeast has no reason to be dependent. And it should be actually a productive economy. It should not be extractive. It should be a net revenue generator, not a net consumer. It should be a net exporter, not a net importer. And this can be done if actually the states and the people of the Northeast simply take their own development in their own hands instead of actually being heavily dependent on the center. And they are capable of doing it. There's no lack of natural resources. There's no lack of human resources. But I think it is more a question of self-organization and a kind of political will that comes with that. Sorry, that became a little longer than I intended.
Okay, next one.
I told you it was a Pandora's box.
Okay. Finally, I would like to invite Mahan to say a word of thanks, and then we'll go for a hike tea.
Good evening, everyone. It is a privilege and a great joy for me to extend word of thanks. First of all, let me thank all the distinguished speakers for their perspective and a great insight on the India-Myanmar border region. Professor Bhagat Oinam, Professor Amarjit Singh, Professor Tonglal Hokip, Professor Koko, and Lieutenant General A.K. Mishra and Ambassador Mukhopadhyaya for your excellent remarks. And finally, let me thank Professor Kipgin, Executive Director of CSEAS, and Professor Samrat Sinha, Director of Border Studies, and all the students who participated in the event, not only participating, and you have actively participated, and thanks a lot.
All right, thank you very much. We have some foods and drinks outside there. People would direct you, please don't go home without taking those foods. Oh, yeah. And the speakers, please remain a little bit, 1 minute. We'd like to take a group.